Forklift trucks are among the most useful labor-saving machines ever invented. You'll find them everywhere that heavy and bulky loads must be moved from place to place. Every year, nearly 10% of all serious industrial accidents involve forklifts. Most of these accidents could have been avoided if the operator followed the simple safety procedures described in this video. Forklift safety is so important that OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, requires that you be trained and authorized to operate forklift trucks. Forklift safety training can reduce the risk of needless accidents and keep you and your coworkers safe on the job. In this presentation, we'll learn about the major parts of a forklift, how to perform a pre-operational check, which you must do before you can operate a forklift, and how to load and unload a forklift safely. We'll also point out some safe driving tips and talk about refueling and basic maintenance procedures. Forklift trucks come in a variety of sizes and shapes, but they all work on the same basic principles and have certain common features. The most common type of forklift is a sit-down rider. It has a pair of tapered steel forks that do the lifting. They're designed to slide into a pallet that the material is loaded on. The spacing between the forks can be adjusted to handle different loads. The forks are a part of a lift carriage that slides up and down a mast. The lift carriage is supported by a pair of lift chains, and it's raised and lowered by a hydraulic piston. The mast is usually hinged at the bottom so it can be tilted forward and backward to stabilize the load. The front wheels provide the drive for the forklift and most of the support for the load. And the back wheels are used for steering. The power source can be an electric motor run off batteries or an engine that runs on propane, gasoline, or diesel fuel. An overhead guard protects you from falling objects or from being crushed if the rig should tip over. Okay, let's take a look at the controls. There's usually a forward-reverse switch, a speed pedal, a brake, and a steering wheel. There's a horn to warn people you're coming. And let's not forget the rear-view mirror, a very important safety item. There's a meter that indicates fuel level or battery charge. And if the engine is water-cooled, a gauge that shows engine temperature. The load is raised and lowered by lift levers that control the hydraulic piston. And the mast is tilted with the tilt lever. The seat usually contains a safety switch that cuts power to the drive wheels and puts the parking brake on whenever the operator gets off the seat. And here's a very important feature you should check out before you use the equipment. It's the nameplate. It tells you the forklift's capacities and capabilities. You'll want to study the instruction manual that came with the forklift. It'll explain these specifications in greater detail, so you'll know your machine like a book. The important things to look for are the weights and capacities of the forklift, the operating controls and instruments, a detailed operational check, and safety and maintenance procedures. Let's talk about load capacities. It's an important safety issue. And remember, we're not just talking about safety to people, but to equipment too. Because not only can you injure yourself or one of your fellow workers by operating the forklift incorrectly or overloading it, but you can damage the machine itself. So it's important never to exceed the load limits indicated on the nameplate. Another important safety factor is how you position the load on the forks. The important concept here is the load's center of gravity. That's the point of balance for the load. Generally, you want to keep the load and therefore the center of gravity as low to the ground as possible. That makes for the safest and most stable condition. If you're carrying a maximum load and the center of gravity is too far forward, the forklift could tip forward and result in a loss of steering control. And if the center of gravity is off to one side, the forklift could tip on a grade or when making a turn, or the load could fall off. So, position the center of gravity close to the mast and centered between the forks, especially when carrying loads near maximum capacity. There are very specific requirements for conducting a safety inspection of a forklift before you use it. These inspections must be performed each day, or if the truck is used around the clock, at the end of each shift. It's not only common sense to follow this pre-operational check, it's the law. So get in the habit of walking around your unit and check it with a critical eye. Inspect the tires. If they're inflatable, check the air pressure too. Look for cracks at the heel of the forks and for bent or damaged forks. These can pose serious safety problems. Closely examine all hydraulic lines for leaks or signs of hose deterioration. Start the engine and check that all gauges are working properly. Test the horn and all other operating controls. Let the engine warm up and check the temperature gauge. If it's running hot and the engine is water-cooled, have maintenance check the water level. For your own safety, never remove the cap from the hot radiator. Your particular machine might have other steps in the pre-op check, so review the owner's manual and add them to your checkout list. If you run into any abnormal indications like engine overheating, follow your organization's procedure. Otherwise, mark the machine out of service. Take the keys and inform your super. You wouldn't want to drive an unsafe car, so don't drive a dangerous forklift. Now let's talk about loading and unloading a forklift truck. Before picking up any load, let's make sure it's stable. In other words, either stacked in a way that it won't move around, or better still, tied securely to a pallet or other platform. Then make sure the load is within your forklift's rated capacity. Set the forks as wide as possible. Then drive straight in with the forks squarely under the load until the load just touches the carriage. The important point to remember is that the forks must always be lined up squarely with the load. That way the load will remain stable while you lift it. Now, tilt the mast back slightly and lift the load just enough to clear the ground. Keep the load as low as possible. That keeps the center of gravity low, and the forklift will be more stable. When setting down the load, always lower it slowly and disengage the forks before backing out. When loading or unloading a vehicle, make sure it won't move from under you. Check that its brakes are set, the wheels chocked, and the docking plates secure. Whether you're picking up a load or dropping one off, always drive straight into the vehicle and back out the same way. If you're unloading into a rack or stack, be sure to face the rack squarely. Then check your overhead clearance. Make sure there's no pipes or wires to snag. Slow and easy does it. Remember, a high load means a high center of gravity and a less stable forklift. Position the load, then tilt the mast forward until the forks are free. Now you can withdraw the forks.
We've covered proper load handling techniques. So let's go on now and talk about safe driving practices.
There are laws covering forklift operation designed to protect people working nearby. For instance, you're not allowed to drive a forklift towards anyone standing in front of a bench or other fixed object, nor should you let anyone stand or pass under the raised forks, whether or not the forks have a load. Unauthorized people aren't allowed to ride on the forklift, and it stands to reason that horseplay or any action that could cause personal harm or injury are simply not allowed. Obey all traffic instructions, such as railroad crossings, one-way and pedestrian lanes, posted speed limits, and so on. And remember that emergency vehicles always have the right of way. When traveling, keep the load as low as possible. That will lower the center of gravity and improve your stability. Always drive at a safe speed. Most forklifts are limited to 6 miles per hour, and under normal conditions, that may be okay. But even 6 miles an hour may be too fast for some conditions, like uneven floors, loose dock plates, and broken ground. If you have to drive over uneven floors or railroad tracks, approach them from an angle rather than head-on, and take it slowly. If you're carrying a load that obstructs your view, turn the forklift around and drive with the load behind you. Forklift trucks can't stop quickly, especially if you're carrying a heavy load. So always allow enough room for stopping, at least 3 truck lengths if you're driving behind another vehicle. Slow down before making a turn, and be sure to signal. You want to make the turn wide and slow to keep the center of gravity from shifting and causing you to tip. You have to get used to the fact that the back wheels do the steering. That makes the rear of the forklift swing out in the opposite direction when you make a turn. So be sure there's enough room, both front and back, when turning. Move slowly down grades with the load as low as possible. Keep the mast tilted back to prevent the load from sliding forward. If you're going down a grade that's more than 10%, you have to keep the load up grade so it can't slide off the forks. That means turning the vehicle around and driving in reverse. If you're going to be carrying a heavy load over a long and unfamiliar distance, it's a good idea to map out your route before starting out, and that your truck is approved for the different areas you'll be traveling through. For example, only certain types of forklift trucks are allowed in areas where there's a combustible dust, and only approved trucks may be used around flammable liquids and gases or vapors. It's a good idea to check with your safety officer if you have any questions. Whenever you approach a blind corner, be sure to slow down and check any implant mirrors to see if the coast is clear. Don't forget to signal. You'll want to be sure, for example, that your mast will clear overhead obstacles like pipes, racks, and other obstructions. Whenever you have to leave your truck unattended, there's a certain procedure that must be followed. Park the forklift away from traffic, and be sure you're not parked in a fire lane or blocking access to a stairwell or fire equipment. Lower the forks to the floor and tilt them flat. The forks will act as an extra parking brake that way. Then shut the power off, place all the controls in neutral, and set the brake. Oh yes, don't forget to take the key.
A lot of the safety procedures we've been talking about are just common sense. And many of the precautions you'll want to follow will depend on your particular work situation. Most likely, the company you'll work for will have a set of forklift safety rules. Follow those rules for your safety and that of your fellow workers. Now let's talk about some general refueling procedures and suggest a few maintenance tips to keep your forklift working safely. You'll want to refer to the instruction manual that came with the forklift for specific procedures and precautions. As we said, forklifts may run on batteries, propane gas, gasoline, or diesel fuels, but regardless of what yours uses, there's danger. So keep safety first. Always refuel in the assigned area, and that area should be equipped with proper ventilation and firefighting equipment, spill containment and cleanup equipment to keep you and the property safe from fire or contamination.
Before refueling any forklift, shut off the engine and set the brake. And no smoking. That's just plain common sense. For battery-operated forklifts, be sure to wear acid-resistant gloves, face shields or goggles, and protective aprons when handling electrolyte. And if you have to mix electrolyte, always add acid to water. Never add water to acid. There could be a violent chemical reaction. When the batteries are on charge, check the vent caps to make sure they're breathing. If the forklift uses gasoline, diesel fuel, or propane, be sure you follow the specific procedures for your rig. Never use a flame to check fuel level. These fuels are highly flammable. And don't forget the ground wire to prevent a spark from starting a fire.
A few more points regarding refueling safety. Be sure and handle any spills according to your company's spill response procedures. And make sure you follow the manufacturer's instructions and your company's rules to prevent explosions and fires. Good maintenance habits are important to your safety and the life of the forklift. If your company has a maintenance policy, be sure and follow it. And maintain any written records neatly and accurately.
In this brief overview of forklift safety, we've talked about the major parts of a forklift and how they operate. We discussed the importance of checking the truck before using it each day. You learned about keeping the center of gravity low, not exceeding the machine's load limits, and some tips on loading and unloading safely. We discussed a number of safe driving procedures and learned some important points about refueling and maintenance. Spend some time going through the instruction manual for the forklift you'll be operating. It will give you many more tips and specific procedures to follow for that particular unit. Even though you check and follow the rules, a problem may come up. Be prepared. Know what to do if there's a hydraulic failure, or if the rig tips over, or there's a fire or collision. Know your company's policy regarding seatbelts and chemical and hazardous material spills, and know who to call in an emergency. If you have any questions about your vehicle or its operation, check the instruction manual or ask your supervisor. Remember, think safety first. For your truck, for your coworkers, and for you.